Hey guys, how you doing? I'm Scott Bowman. I work at INL as a cyber physical system researcher, and I'm going to be talking to you today about transforming cyber threat intelligence into OT guidance. So let's start with a question, and this is something that has driven this conversation that I want to have with you, is when was the first time that you heard a CTI analyst or cyber threat intelligence product, you read it, and you're like, I know what to do now? Most of the time, if that person knows what they're doing, they either wrote the paper or they are another cyber threat intelligence analyst that's really into it. So not a lot of times does that get just forwarded to the OT staff and they're like, I know what to do. So I was thinking, what reference could I use to kind of set the stage for y'all? And there's nothing better than the Matrix, and specifically the character Tank, who sits behind all these screens where the entire matrix is encoded, and they can't even decode it, so he has to read it as code. And he gets on the mic, and he talks to the hero that we all know, Neo. And in this analogy, I'm going to use Neo as the OT staff member, a control system engineer, OT supervisor, the guy out in the field, because he's got to navigate his cyber physical space and watch out for agents. And most of the time, these guys don't care about the agents in the wire, but we do need to be able to translate what we know as cyber threat intelligence analysts to procedures and workflows that they understand. So let's start with what it looks like on the cyber threat intelligence analyst perspective. I wanted to take a picture of my desk, but I couldn't do that, but this is the best I could give you. Whenever a new cyber threat intelligence advisory sticks objects, if you're familiar with the threat intelligence exchange format, and then a reliable source of threat reporting. And I put up a SANS Frosty Goop threat report that is going to kind of guide how I will show you how I transformed this threat intelligence into something that could be much more valuable to different people that aren't cyber people. Because most of the time, it's either like a Microsoft Teams, email, some kind of internal communications where you say, hey, this is what we need to do. Maybe you have a little bit more sophisticated thing. Maybe you don't have anything and you're just like having a conversation with Bob sitting next to you. But I wanted to keep with the analogy. This is usually, if a CTI analyst is talking to these control system engineers and the supervisors, they're like, you're still speaking in this encoded language that I do not understand, right? And that's a problem because we as CTI professionals, we should be a navigator for their environment. We should know their environment well enough, not just the right cyber language, to communicate which new malware or which new threat actor could be in your environment. So we want to avoid being cyber threat intelligence analysts that use this kind of matrix type language. Why does this happen though? It happens for a good reason, and you probably see it in your organizations very frequently. Some people call it silos, other people call it their fiefdom of speciality. And what happens is we're taught to take data, information, and knowledge and turn it into these if-else statements where it's like, if you see this, do this. And we consider that to be something akin to wisdom, right? Guidance and action. What can you do? And so this is really great. And I use the Luxor pyramid there with the light coming out because what we're doing is generating some kind of vague landmark of hope that we can make it through this kind of battle that we have with cyber threats in our environment. But it doesn't really work because, as you know, silos don't do a lot of good, right? So what I want to do is introduce to you a different process that is just inversion. It's not that clever, but this model is going to be the main process we use, where we take data, information, and knowledge, and we make it retrievable, right? So I'm calling this the DIKW, data, information, K for knowledge, and W for wisdom, funnel, right? So we're going to funnel these things to make them retrievable. And we have to be very aware of who the people are that are going to be leveraging this knowledge and wisdom. And in order to do that, you have to spend a lot of time with the data. And you have to make sure that it's properly pre-processed. formatted, and stored so that it can be accessible. And so that's what the technology in this kind of people, process, and technology look is all about. And so I'm going to dive a little bit into, if you don't know how the National Lab system works, I work at Idaho National Lab, and a lot of the tools and things that I'm going to be showing you come from the National Lab ecosystem, specifically Idaho National Lab and Sandia National Lab. The goal of the lab system is to do 90% of this risk-heavy research, right? That maybe industry can't, won't, or shouldn't do, right? We're just not going to invest in this type of approach yet. We're not sure about it. And so we have a little bit different structure for the people, process, and technology, where there's probably not a lot of AI ML researchers in your organization. So they come to the lab and we try to figure out the right way to use these tools. And you probably don't have the inverted DIKW funnel in your internal processes. And you probably don't have the tools that we've created that is ideally going to be a web application. So we are doing these really risk-heavy things that maybe you don't want to quite invest yet, but you're interested in. And what we need from you is 10% of the effort, right? When I say you, I mean people who are in the industry actually doing these things, where you care about your own internal organization, your internal processes, and your technology. We just want to interface with you at the technology level mostly and ask for your feedback and how do we integrate these things and work through those bugs. It's a pre-commercial technology transfer portal is what we kind of call it, where we create these things and eventually make it available to you. So that's what we're going to be working towards. And the program that I'm representing, our main mission is decision intelligence research. And so this is preparing a large corpus of data, information, and knowledge, and preparing it so that it's easily retrievable. And the big thing I want you to take away from here, there's a lot going on here, but the biggest thing is that these color-coded orbs are really representing areas of research that are supplying the data, the knowledge, and the information. And we're trying to do that so that we can make sure that we are purpose-building these processes to create a usable output for you, whatever your particular interest is. And so in the rest of the slides, you're going to see the red, cyber-physical testing, threat analysis and mitigation, and market and supply chain analysis. And you'll understand what those specifically mean as I get there. So now I want to dive into the meat of my talk, which is what we created, the decision intelligence technology stack. And this is something that's modular, and if you're really curious about what like the back end looks like, there's a lot of fast API microservices so that we can retrieve information from models and data sets. But the pre-processing sequence is starting with a threat report. Remember I told you Frosty Goop is where we're starting because that's what the CTI analyst is starting with. And every analyst is going to know that you have to read the document and doing text analysis. And then in order to get the data in the right organizational format, we have to put into a sequence. And that's all for the purpose of being able to easily create an adversary emulation of the behavior. And then we want to do our due diligence as CTI analysts and make sure that we understand the systems that represent our environment. And that's why we need to do systems of systems analysis, even getting to the physics-based modeling of the systems that we're trying to protect. And all of these impacts that we're going to be looking at in the adversary behavior within this environment, it also exists within a business system, and there will be impacts to your business. So we want to be cognizant of what the business impacts could be if this new threat is realized. So that's wonderful. We're getting to the point where we understand the impacts. Finally, we want to filter out the most valuable information that you are going to be looking for, and we're going to use Bayesian risk analysis to do that. And then finally, we're going to use generative AI for what it's good for, which is taking a knowledge base and then translating it to the specific person you want to communicate with. And you can see that that's a problem for a lot of people in organizations where they don't easily communicate across these organizational staff groups. So we're going to try to leverage generative AI and see what the results are. So let's start with the text analysis. This is a tool called the Attack Chain Estimator. It specifically is where an analyst will upload a file, right, a text file. And they're gonna read the Frosty Goop text file, and they're going to scan it and look for potential places where tactics and techniques, adversary behaviors are taking place. And you can see here the analyst has highlighted this, and they've put it as the first step in their attack sequence. And so this is helpful because you now understand what are the step-by-step behaviors that an adversary is going to, potentially display in your environment. But this is not enough. We need to enrich it with historical context. Not every new threat is going to be completely new in your environment. It will likely resemble other attacks. So what I have here is, it's built upon a data set of 27 historical OT attacks that we analyzed for about 2 years in extreme depth. And we created those sequences down to every observable event that we could identify from publicly available data. And so what I did is I used an approach called a Markov model, where if you have sequences and you know what happened first and next, you can put that into a model, and then once you pick any specific tactic and technique in a chain, you can get an estimate of what the next tactics and techniques will be. And so what we'll have at this point, as the analyst goes through this, they're gonna have the Frosty Goop chain, and they're gonna have this historical chain, and this historical chain is gonna look like this. It's just a table, and it shows you the transition probability, how likely one tactic and technique transition to the next based upon historical context. And so this is a really refined, historically relevant attack chain, and you can do this as many times as you want and create as many attack chains as you want. And then you can export this for adversary emulation. And there's a reason that we use MITRE ATT&CK for ICS as kind of defining what the tactics and techniques are. It's because it makes it very easy to communicate with other CTI analysts and other people within cyber about what's happening, because we've created a common language thanks to MITRE. And so what we've done here is we've leveraged MITRE Caldera. And if you don't know what MITRE Caldera is, it is an adversary emulation platform where you can pick which tactics and techniques you want to happen in a sequence. And then it has abilities built into it that emulate these tactics and techniques. And here you can see that we have a couple of tactics and techniques that are point and tag identification. And then you can see as I run the operation there, you can see the register values of the PLC that I'm targeting. So I was able to effectively achieve this collection of point and tag information. And once you get your sequence of tactics and techniques, you can put it in there, test it before you put it in the next environment that I'm going to show you, and make sure that these return valid outputs. So, because I'm from Houston, I decided that it'd be great if we could make this relevant to something that is very popular in Houston, which is oil and natural gas infrastructure. So we decided to make a MATLAB Simulink physics model of a compressor station. Again, we didn't take any data from any actual facility. We just took an understanding of the basic components of the system, and then we used MATLAB and Simulink. If you're an engineer and you probably went to engineering school and used these to make your system models, that's what we did. And these represent the input and output at the Purdue level 0 and 1, if you're familiar with the Purdue levels. And then we have a tool called Minimega, which is a virtualization platform. You put VMs in it, and you can use it just like Legos, to where you can expand to scales that we haven't even got to the largest scale that they know of yet. So ideally, you can scale this to multiple facilities. You can scale this to maybe the size of Texas. I don't know, that might be somebody's desire one day. And we can then do adversary emulation at very different scales. And we can collect the observable events and the impacts within the realm of physics. These are really important, and the best way to do that is to have this kind of single view, and that's what Minimega provides, is a single view of your VMs and your environment that you have. You can see we have PLCs in there. We have Caldera is already in the environment. And we have various places where you can see what are the components within your environment in one view. And so we run this, and we can run the emulations as many times as we need to create the scenarios that we're most worried about. We spent a lot of time trying to create a turbine offline failure event scenario. And we use the behaviors from Frosty Goop, where they can manipulate things with Modbus, and we were able to do some things, right? And so we can take that data, it's refined now to knowledge, right? If you can see on my slide, the funnels there, we've taken this technology stack to a point where we have knowledge now. And that's because it's converted to our own environment. And now I'm gonna show you, we know the engineering impacts, we know what the cyber observables are, but what about the business impact? So I'm gonna show you quickly, I created a prompt for an on-premise generative AI LLM, and we have the EIA, which is the Energy Information Administration. They have publicly available market and market data on the energy sector. And so I'm gonna ask this LLM to provide me with what is the average daily flow of a natural gas compressor station. And you can see there it's 75 million cubic feet. And it's providing you with the market data where it's about $3 per million cubic feet. So it looks like it's about $225,000 a day of revenue at this one compressor station. So maybe that sounds familiar. If you're in oil and gas, that's pretty close. Maybe it's not. But I really wanted to get what's the daily revenue generation, because Frosty Goop had 2 days of interruption. And so like if we're gonna take this and just say, if we just take this one for one, it's about 1 to 2 days of interruption. And so that's easier math now. We can communicate what the business impact would be. So back to our cyber observables. Now that we've got the impacts and the consequences kind of modeled, we wanna go back, and I don't know if you've ever looked at a bunch of cyber observables or physics observables, but the data can be extremely large, and it's not going to be very useful to just throw that at an LLM and say, tell me what's happening. So we're going to use Bayesian risk analysis, and we created a model of cyber attacks, specifically in the OT environment, to help us tell if there's adversary behavior happening based upon the observables we present. And the best way I can break this down in the simplest terms is we took every single observable event from these cyber attacks, and we asked ourselves, expert elicitation style, where we have experts telling us what they think, how normal is this event? How many times does it happen per year? And then if we know which tactic and technique it happened with, that we correlate it to, how critical is this event to this tactic and technique happen? So an example would be, if you have the tactics and technique spearfishing, you have to have an email, right? Like that is 100% has to happen. So if you're getting emails every day, that means your normal frequency is daily or weekly, and it's critical for this tactic and technique to happen. So we're filtering out how valuable the different observables are. And the result of this is that you get high value observable events. And so here's a heat map of one of the sequences. Like I said, we created the sequence, we ran it through our environment, and now we have this collection of observables. How do we determine which is the thing we have to look for? Well, the ones that are at high value, diagnostic value, and the ones that are happening on the left side of the x-axis are early in the attack, and then as you move right, that's closer to the impact techniques. So you want to focus on the observables that are at the top there. And we take those, and we have to make sure that we're assigning these to people that can comprehend them. And so this approach also helps us look at the tactics and techniques and say which of the staff orgs need to know which part of the attack chain. And you can see here, IT needs to know about the first 9 tactics and techniques. OT cyber is going to have to look like from 5 to 30. And then OT staff is going to have at least an understanding of the behaviors that are from 10 to to 10 to 30. So now we have a way of assigning who needs to look for these observable events. And what I'm going to do now is show you how I'm creating a personalized prompt first for the decision makers, the supervisors, the managers, people who care about the business impacts as well as the system of systems. So here I'm creating a prompt. You're a strategic advisory assistant, and it gives you a brief on the threat, system of systems analysis, some of the primary attack details, and so as it's going through there, it's also adding the business value, and this is just one prompt, right? And I told you there's a 90-10 rule of what we're providing you. We've got the knowledge base built so that you can ask questions that's going to give you a reasonable answer. There may be things in here that you're going to have to provide 10% of the effort to refine it, right? You have your own internal procedures, you have your own threat intelligence analysis, you have your own way of communicating with your staff organization, so there'll need to be some adjustments. But now, the moment we've all been waiting for, getting to the OT staff. So it is going to tell you about the malware and what some of the entry vectors and what the capabilities are, but it's going to give you very brief, natural language ways of explaining what are the observable events and what are the physics-based indicators. And then it's going to give you some immediate response activities that you can take. And then because I'm in control of what the organization does, they created a see something, say something kind of policy. And then also what we need to do when there's an incident after it. And so this is a pretty good start. Now, it's not going to be perfect. Again, 10% of the work is refining this to your own internal processes. But I just want to review real quick. Where we started was with this one-dimensional threat report that maybe CTI people are going to read, but your OT staff is probably not. What we need to do is add a little bit of what your environment looks like and what the adversary looks like in your environment. And then we want our heroes, the OT staff members, to be able to point out in their own view what OT adversary behavior looks like so that they can take action. And so that's me taking you all the way through how we've approached leveraging a few different technologies as well as generative AI. So thank you. I think I have some time for questions if anybody has questions. All right, guys. Wow. Guess that's it.